This is Mr. Kennedy, and today we're examining something that relationship experts refuse to acknowledge: the hidden relationship tax that is driving capable men to opt out of partnerships entirely. And I am not just talking about financial costs, though those are significant, and we will get to them with full precision. I am talking about the emotional, mental, and psychological costs that accumulate daily, quietly, invisibly, until men reach the breaking point where they calculate their peace versus their partnership and discover the math simply doesn't add up anymore. Every relationship has a tax: the compromise, the effort, the emotional labor, the sacrifices required to maintain a partnership. Historically, this tax was worth paying because the benefits justified the costs. The equation made sense. You invested in a specific direction and received a specific return, and the return was worth the investment. But something fundamental has shifted in the modern relationship structure. For many men, particularly men who have lived both sides of this equation with full awareness, that tax has become exponentially higher than the reward. The costs keep expanding, the benefits keep shrinking, until the equation inverts entirely, and a man who has been paying an escalating price for a depreciating asset finally sits down, runs the honest numbers, and decides he's done. If you're here expecting romantic platitudes about how love transcends calculation, you are in the wrong place. We don't deal in socially acceptable lies on this channel. This is about the honest accounting of what relationships actually cost versus what they actually provide. The full ledger, not the edited version society hands you to keep you compliant. And it is about understanding why capable men with options and resources and genuine self-awareness, are increasingly refusing to pay the tax. Stay with me. This goes deeper than you think. Let's start by defining what the relationship tax actually means, because precision matters here, and vague language is how these costs stay invisible. The relationship tax is the aggregate cost, emotional, mental, psychological, temporal, and financial, of maintaining a relationship above and beyond what you would spend maintaining yourself and your own life. Every partnership requires investment. That is not in dispute. The question is whether the investment produces a positive return or operates at a loss, whether you are building genuine equity in something that grows in value, or whether you are paying rent on someone else's emotional infrastructure while your own resources deplete. The tax is not a single line item. It is a collection of recurring costs, most of which are never named, never quantified, and never acknowledged by the cultural narrative that tells men their job is to pay and be grateful for the privilege. Let's name them. Let's quantify them. Let's look at the full accounting that the relationship industry has a financial interest in preventing you from running. The first tax is the emotional labor tax. This is the energy you spend managing her emotions, preventing her upsets, navigating her moods, absorbing her frustrations, providing reassurance on a timeline that has nothing to do with your own emotional state, offering validation for feelings that have no logical grounding. All the emotional work you perform that serves her emotional experience rather than accomplishing anything productive for either of you. You are expected to be her therapist, her emotional manager, her constant validator, and her primary source of psychological stability, while simultaneously maintaining your own masculine composure when you face your own struggles, because burdening her with your emotional reality is considered inappropriate or threatening to the dynamic. The asymmetry here is not subtle. It is structural. The emotional labor flows in one direction. You provide, she receives. When the flow reverses and you need emotional support, the response is frequently inadequate, conditional, or absent. You pay the emotional labor tax every single day. The invoice is never acknowledged. The payment is never optional. The second tax is the mental load tax, the cognitive space occupied by relationship maintenance, the invisible management layer that runs constantly in the background of your mind, regardless of what else you are trying to do. Remembering important dates and the emotional consequences of forgetting them, tracking her preferences across dozens of categories, anticipating her needs before she articulates them because being told what she needs is apparently insufficient, and the expectation is that you should already know. Planning your time and finances around her schedule and her priorities, managing the logistics of a shared life in ways that add massive complexity to your existence while generating very little visible output. This tax is particularly costly because it is invisible. Nobody sees it. Nobody acknowledges it. It doesn't appear on any balance sheet, but it consumes real cognitive bandwidth that would otherwise be available for work, for creative output, for strategic thinking, for the pursuits that actually advance your life. The mental load tax tax is a silent drain on your most productive resource, and it compounds across years of relationship maintenance into a significant accumulated cost. The third tax is the conflict resolution tax, the exhaustion of managing disagreements in a system where the rules are structurally designed against you, navigating conflicts where logic is not the operative framework and her emotional state determines what counts as truth, apologizing for things that are objectively not your fault, because the alternative, maintaining your position and absorbing the extended conflict that follows, costs more than the false admission. Walking on eggshells to avoid triggering episodes that will consume hours or days of emotional energy, regardless of what originally caused them. In many modern relationships, conflict serves no productive purpose. It doesn't resolve anything. It doesn't generate understanding. It doesn't produce better outcomes. It is, in many cases, manufactured conflict. Tension created where no genuine problem exists because emotional volatility has been mistaken for passion, and a relationship without constant emotional turbulence feels flat or inauthentic. You are not resolving real problems when you manage these conflicts. You are processing emotional weather, and the cost of that processing is substantial. The fourth tax is the autonomy tax, the freedom you permanently surrender to accommodate the existence of the partnership. You cannot make unilateral decisions about your own life in any domain that touches the relationship, which turns out to be most domains. You cannot spend your money without justification. You cannot use your time without accounting. You cannot make choices about your living space, your social life, your career direction, or your daily routine without filtering them through the impact on her preferences and the potential conflict generated by deviating from them. Your Friday night requires negotiation. Your Sunday morning requires compromise. Your financial goals require approval. Autonomy is not a luxury. For men who have built genuine self-sufficiency, who have developed a clear sense of what they value and how they want to live, autonomy is the foundation of a functional life. The autonomy tax doesn't just cost you freedom in the abstract. It costs you the ability to live according to your own values and your own judgment, the very things that made you the kind of man worth partnering with in the first place. The fifth tax is the drama tax, the cost of the chaos she generates that you are expected to absorb, stabilize, and manage. Emotional volatility you have to regulate from the outside because she hasn't developed the internal capacity to regulate it herself. Conflicts with her social network that get imported into your shared life and require your participation, whether you have relevant context or not. Anxieties and insecurities that are fundamentally hers to manage, but that manifest as demands on your time, energy, and emotional availability. The turbulence that simply wouldn't exist in your life if you were single, because you are a stable person, and your baseline state in the absence of these external inputs is peace. The drama tax is perhaps the most insidious because it is unpredictable. The other taxes are recurring and somewhat foreseeable. The drama tax arrives without warning and with no correlation to anything you've done or failed to do. It is entirely externally generated and entirely your problem to manage. These are not one-time costs. These are recurring expenses that accumulate daily, weekly, monthly, year after year. The compound effect of these taxes across a decade of partnership is staggering in ways that most men never calculate because they are actively discouraged from calculating it. Quantifying relationship costs is framed as unromantic, as evidence of emotional coldness, as a failure to understand what love requires. But ignoring costs doesn't make them disappear. It simply ensures you pay them without ever understanding what you are and aren't getting in return. Let's look at the other side of the ledger now. Let's examine what the relationship was historically supposed to deliver and compare that to what it actually delivers in the modern structure. Historically, the relationship tax was worth paying because the return was clear and consistent. You paid the tax and you received specific, reliable benefits that justified the costs at a fundamental level. Consistent sexual access, not contingent, not weaponized, not deployed as a negotiating instrument, but genuinely available as a natural component of committed partnership. A managed domestic environment where her labor contribution complemented yours and the household functioned more effectively as a unit than either of you could manage independently. Social legitimacy and the practical advantages that came with recognized partnership. The foundation for a family, if that was your direction. And genuine emotional support. Not the performance of support, not conditional support that disappears when you need it most, but actual investment in your well-being from someone who had chosen you and meant it. That value proposition made the tax rationale. The math worked because the return was real, and the return was consistent. You could calculate the costs and the benefits and reach a reasonable conclusion that the investment was sound. That value proposition has changed fundamentally. Let's run the honest accounting of what the modern relationship actually delivers against what it costs. Sexual access is no longer consistent or reliable. It is contingent on her mood, her stress level, her satisfaction with your performance across multiple unrelated domains, and her assessment of whether you have adequately met the emotional and material standards of the current period. It is frequently weaponized, granted as a reward for compliance, withheld as a consequence for any perceived failure. It declines precipitously over the course of long-term relationships in ways that are well documented and rarely discussed honestly. You are paying a tax that was originally justified in significant part by this return, and the return has been removed from the agreement without renegotiation. Domestic labor is no longer a net benefit. You are expected to split it equally, regardless of any income disparity, regardless of the hours you are working, regardless of any other variable that might logically affect the allocation. The domestic contribution you receive is largely offset by the domestic contribution you provide. The household efficiency that partnership was supposed to generate has been replaced by a domestic labor negotiation that frequently costs more in conflict and resentment than it would cost you to simply manage your own space independently. Emotional support has become largely theoretical. You are expected to manage your own emotional experience without making demands on her, while simultaneously providing emotional support for hers without limitation or complaint. Reciprocal emotional investment, the actual experience of having someone in your corner who is genuinely concerned with your well-being and demonstrates that concern through action, is rare in the modern relationship structure and gets rarer as relationships age. You are an emotional labor provider. You are not an emotional labor recipient. The calculation men are making once they have experienced both sides of this equation is not complicated. It is simply honest. Partnered life at current tax rates delivers conditional intimacy on a declining schedule, neutral domestic labor that cancels itself out, minimal emotional support, and the constant overhead of emotional management, conflict processing, autonomy loss, mental load, and drama absorption. The net result, when you run it honestly, is a negative return on a substantial and continuously increasing investment. Single life delivers complete autonomy over every domain of your existence, zero emotional labor obligations beyond what you choose to take on, zero manufactured conflict, zero drama that originates outside your own choices, mental clarity that compounds over time as the cognitive space previously consumed by relationship management becomes available for other purposes, a baseline state of peace that you stop noticing after years of partnership and rediscover with extraordinary relief when the partnership ends. The costs are handling your own domestic life, which you were handling half of anyway, and navigating social contexts as an individual rather than as part of a unit. When men run this comparison honestly, not the romanticized version, not the version filtered through the social pressure to be partnered, but the actual lived experience version, single life wins. Not by a small margin, by a substantial margin. The quality of life differential is significant, and it is not primarily about the absence of a specific person. It is about the absence of the structural costs that modern partnership imposes on men who have the self-awareness to recognize them. Here is what makes the relationship tax particularly devastating as a long-term proposition. It compounds over time while the benefits simultaneously depreciate. In the first year, the tax is relatively low. Both parties are performing their best behavior. Accommodation is easier because the relationship hasn't yet established patterns of extraction. Intimacy is frequent because novelty generates it automatically. You are receiving benefits that seem, in that early period, to justify the costs you're paying. The math looks workable. By year 5, the tax has increased substantially. The accommodation that was natural early on now requires conscious effort and generates resentment when it isn't reciprocated. The benefits have declined from their peak because novelty has dissipated and the relationship has settled into patterns. You need to invest more to generate the same return. The efficiency of the investment has deteriorated. By year 10, for many men, the tax is consuming a significant portion of their emotional, mental, and financial resources. The benefits have continued their decline. You are paying more for less, and the trajectory is not pointing toward improvement, but you are trapped by the accumulated investment you've already made, by the financial entanglement that makes exit expensive, by the social infrastructure that has grown up around the partnership, and by the sunk cost fallacy that tells you that walking away means everything you invested was wasted. The men who finally do the calculation and walk away, who close the ledger, absorb the exit costs, and rebuild their lives on their own foundation, describe a specific experience with remarkable consistency. Not the bitterness the culture predicts, not the loneliness the narrative warns about. Relief. The profound, physical relief of a man who has put down a weight he had been carrying for so long he forgot what it felt like to stand upright without it. Society will tell you that running this calculation is wrong, that quantifying relationship value is evidence of emotional damage, that men who opt out of bad contracts are failing at manhood, rather than demonstrating the financial and emotional literacy to refuse investment in a losing position. The culture has a structural interest in that narrative. The marriage industry, the therapy industry, the content economy built around relationship advice. All of it depends on men believing that the only appropriate response to a bad relationship contract is to invest harder, communicate better, and make yourself more palatable to someone who has already demonstrated that your investment will not generate a proportional return. You are allowed to close the ledger. You are allowed to walk away from a contract that costs more than it returns. You don't owe anyone your peace, your autonomy, your mental clarity, or your resources. The choice to opt out of a bad investment is not bitterness. It is not failure. It is not evidence of emotional immaturity or an inability to love. It is a man seeing the board clearly and making the only move that actually protects what he has built. If the accounting in this video reflects calculations you have been running in your own life, if the numbers you've been privately totaling match the numbers we laid out here, drop a comment. Share your data point. Tell me where you are in the process, what you've calculated, what you've decided. The conversation between men who are seeing this clearly is how this analysis reaches the men who need it most. Subscribe to the channel. Every week, we run the numbers that nobody else is willing to run. Without the romantic filter, without the politically acceptable softening, without the socially comfortable lies that keep capable men paying taxes on contracts that were never designed to work in their favor. You don't need to keep paying costs that exceed the benefits. Your peace is worth more than the performance of partnership. Stay healthy.